This is Terry, and before we start today's show, I'd like to note that we're releasing 2 episodes today. First, our normal Tomes of Magic episode for Dragons of the East, and then a separate episode on how Adam treats East Asia in his games. Jamming them together would have been a well over 2-hour episode, so if you already know World of Darkness Revised's presentation of East Asia, you can skip our Tomes of Magic episode and go straight to Adam's episode, or if you have no interest in hearing how another ST uses their region, you can skip the companion episode and just stick with our book walkthrough. If you like this way of handling things, or really don't, send us a note. magethepodcast@gmail.com, or shoot us a comment in Discord at discord.me/magethepodcast. Also in today's show notes, there's a link to Chantry Building Project by community member Eilon Rouge, who's looking for feedback before releasing it. So if you're looking to update your Chantry construction rules for the first time since Book of Chantries, here's an option. And with that, on with the show.
Hello, Mage fans, and welcome to Mage the podcast that works hard towards ascension so you don't have to. I'm your host, Adam Simpson. I'm joined again by Terry Robinson, and we are going to give you another episode today of Tomes of Magic. We are in Revised Edition, and we are going to discuss Dragons of the East. This was a book that was surprisingly just for Mage. There was no Year of the Lotus or official crossover logo for another game. It is just a Mage book, but came out in 2000, and around this time, the Kindred of the East game books for, I guess sort of for Vampire, but really for the World of Darkness as a whole, were selling pretty well. People were excited about it. And I'm excited about this book because Asia has been a big part of my life. So it's really great that we're going to be able to get into this. And as I was talking to Terry about how we're going to handle this, I had pages and pages of notes. I said, this is going to be a 4-hour extravaganza. Everybody's going to love it. I am pumped. And then Terry started talking to me about being reasonable, which is something I never really did understand. But I'm going to take a lot of the notes and push them off to a bonus episode, I guess an overflow episode, if you will. And so we're going to put that up for all of you to listen if you would like. It's just going to be me talking about the extra material that didn't make it to the primary episode of Tomes of Magic that we're doing here today. And you can just hear me talk about mages in Asia and things that I noticed in Dragons of the East that I thought were interesting. And it's going to be free of charge and worth every penny. It came out in the year 2000. There were 5 authors, and I need to let you know up front that Terry and I are going to mispronounce more than a few words on this one. It's nothing personal. We don't have anything against any Asian cultures or traditions. It's just that while we were reading this book and prepping for this episode, we didn't quite have time to learn Japanese and Chinese and Korean and Thai and Khmer, which is what they speak in Cambodia, and Vietnamese and many other languages. So when you hear us butcher the words in this book, if you want to make fun of us online, hey, I totally get that. But we'll do our best for you.
Yeah, originally I asked Adam what his thoughts were on Dragons of the East, and apparently that was wrong.
Chapter 1 gives a brief overview of the history of Asian nations and regions. Chapter 2 gives summaries of Asian religions and philosophies. I'll share some thoughts in the bonus episode, but I will say I appreciated the sidebar that made it clear no religion should be considered the domain of a single mage faction. For example, a religious Taoist would work equally well as an Asian technocrat, an Akashic brother, or an orphan. These chapters were straight real-world information apart from a few short sidebars that offered a few details. In 2000, as now, Mage fans would be better served doing their own research on the topics that interest them and not wading through the ones that don't. But that's the snapshot for the first 2 chapters. And now Chapter 3 is where we get into the meat of the book, where we get World of Darkness information for East Asia. So, Terry, let's hear about Chapter 3.
Chapter 3 is entitled The Lightning People. Just as Adam said, we don't know how to pronounce things, don't add us. I will summarize this book as in 4 words with Asia big, Asia old. And that is very much the feeling I got as I got through this. So Chapter 3, The Lightning People, or in this case, the Chinta, is the term that the book uses for mages in Asia. Presents the idea that there was this time long ago where mages used to be in balance with one another, and each took care of specific aspects of making sure that the world operated. That the Akashic fought the Wulong philosophically, and between the two of them, that brought balance to leadership. The Wukang made sure that the Yama Kings, which is to say the demons and the infernal forces, were subdued, and the 5 elemental dragons protected people from sorcerers who could mess things up. But that balance is gone. And what it does is it says, hey, we just gave you a chapter of history, so we're going to start this chapter with history. And it breaks down that into a sequence of ages. And it very much represents this as being cyclical. The first age was the primordial creation stage from which even the most basic sorcerers had come from. And it suggests that there was a time before that harkened back to a previous age. And I'm like, oh man, is this a reference to Exalted? And I'm like, probably not, because that game doesn't come out for another 3 years. But the second age is when things kind of start happening, and years are not given for any of these in this book. You can kind of imply what they are based on the references they make. It's not exactly the easiest thing to pin down. The second age is marked by what they refer to as the demons and sages, that the basic balance between the tiger, dragon, and phoenix is kind of established, which is kind of their terminology they use for dynamism, entropy, and stasis, respectively. The tiger representing dynamism, the dragon representing entropy, and the phoenix representing stasis. This is the age when the Yama Kings, the demon lords of the Asian hells, rise up and start consuming the tapestry. And the first awakenings start occurring as the destruction of the tapestry caused the secrets of life and death to seep into the world, and mages pick that up. They also introduced the idea of Kaya or Kaja. It was this proto-language that had, or this spirit language that mages were able to pick up phrases, but it specifically says that mages do not speak it natively and they do not speak it fluently, that there are key phrases that they understand, and their goal is to reproduce those key phrases as artfully as humanly possible.
I was thinking how in a lot of Japanese and some Chinese movies and fictional stories, Sanskrit often ends up as like the ancient language which they use for their magical practices, but they can't speak in daily life. And Sanskrit, of course, comes from India. It's my wife had to study Sanskrit growing up in school in India in much the same way that Americans are sometimes asked to study Latin growing up in school. It's old, it's hard, and you can't speak it to anyone.
The third age is marked by magical users kind of being separated into shaman and philosophers. We get the idea that peasant magicians had to defend the people from the increasing chaos of the spirit world brought about by the Ministry of Heaven and the Yama Kings fighting. So this is kind of interesting in that when we look at the kind of the Western recounting of history for mages, it starts with a great old time and then just kind of gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And now everything sucks and the apocalypse is about to come or something like that. But here it very much represents the flow over time as something that has risen and fallen. And then we get to the fourth age, where the stuff hits the fan. And this very much felt like, this seems to encapsulate a span of a couple of thousand years, which starts at about the beginning of the first millennium BCE and runs through to something like 2,000 years later. The fourth age is when the wall separating the spirit world rises. This is also when the Kuijin or the Wanjian kind of make their first appearance. They are a recurring group that will appear, and they represent the original 10,000 immortals that were entrusted with defending creation. At some point, they learn the secret to increase their power to attack the Yama Kings and protect peasants and so on by consuming chi in a way that knocks them out of balance. That causes them to kind of fall from grace, and eventually the august personage of Jade kind of curses them. A person by the name of Yi appears, who is the father of the Shi demon hunters, and goes around killing vampires and other such things, and teaches peasants and so on, and seems to have the East Asian version of true faith, what we never get rules on. There's an additional aside where they talk about the Shaolin Temple being formed, which was originally full of sickly people because all the people at the Shaolin Temple were so healthy and vital that the Kuijin would go there to feed off of them, which would leave them sickly, which seemingly defeated the purpose of them being all healthy until somebody arrived to be like, yo, you got vamps everywhere. And they're like, should we kill all the vamps? And he's like, no. If everyone plays nice, they're allowed to stay. But you're not allowed to eat the initiates anymore. And the vampires are like, well, okay, I guess this one time. And for a brief period of time, peace reigned. And this is kind of scattershot, and I almost want to apologize to the listener for none of this making any sense. But it's a lot of new terms. It's a lot of very old things. Maybe a glossary would have been more helpful in some of the places. The elemental dragons, who we will eventually call the Dalou'laoshi, which is to say the East Asian Order of Reason, which is, I recognize that it is fundamentally a different thing. I'm saying East Asian Order of Reason because that's way easier to say, and I think it makes it easier to follow. I recognize that it represents kind of a different tradition and thought period. They try and create a set of useful alliances during the Warring State periods. It didn't work. The Akashics and the Wukang gang up against the Wulong. The Wulong then gang up with the nobility against the Akashics. There's peace for about 400 years. The Akashics hold off the Mongols until they can't. The Kamikaze War prevents Japan from being overtaken. And that brings us to the Fifth Age. There's a lot of stuff that happens. The Fifth Age is kind of marked with the coming of the West. That for many countries, the West could not be kept out. With Japan, it reasonably could be, the benefits of being an island, but the empire led by what they refer to as the Stone People, which is to say the Technocracy. Throughout the Fifth Age, this kind of war continues between the Wulong, the Wukang, and the Akashics in terms of what mages are doing in East Asia. There's more back and forth. The Wukang largely bide their time. That is until World War II makes things super complicated. The Sixth Age is now upon us. The five metal dragons, that is to say, the five conventions of the Technocracy, are seemingly unavailable. Magic can't be done like it used to. People need to fend for themselves and possibly abandon history.
It felt claustrophobic to me because there's only 4 mage factions making things happen and having things happen to them. I just thought that there should have been more there. And in my World of Darkness, I tend to have more groups with more goals and more things going on. But also the mystic history here was pegged so close to real history. I like to see more things going on that only mages know about and sleepers just have no idea that it even occurred. I did like the fact that they went to the some of the events mentioned briefly in the Overflow book for the revised edition core book. I think it was called Storyteller's Companion. Mm-hmm. They had a really brief history of the rest of the world there, and it just briefly mentions a few groups and a few historical events. And some of those get fleshed out here, which I really appreciated and think is fun to add for background to an Asian game.
Yeah, the closest comparison I have is whenever I'm traveling in a country where I do not speak the language, when I'm trying to read a street sign, I have to look at it 30 times. If I'm in the United States and I'm like, oh yeah, you need to turn left at South Houston Street. And you're like, okay, South Houston Street, got it, easy, that's easy. And you can just kind of look at the sign and be like, hey look, South Houston Street, I need to make a left here. But when I was in Germany, it would be like, you need to make a left at Essen-Reichenstrasse. And you'd be like, okay, this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 S's. This sign has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 S's. Okay, so these two can't be the same word. And everything took like 7 times longer because I didn't speak the language. And I felt the same here, where like I just felt like a small child as I was reading through, and it'd be like, blah, 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 divided into shamans and philosopher, the Shang are the historical, the Wulong. So I on one end, I'm like, oh man, there really should have been a lot more people, because if we were to project this forward into 2020, there are 4.5 billion people in Asia. There are 4.5 billion people. They outnumber Americans 15 to 1. But if we took the number and scaled it up, there would be, let me do rough calculations, 32 million traditions. And I don't know if I could keep track of that. The next section is on the groups, and there are three main ones, followed by a bunch of little ones. It starts out with the history of the Akashic Brotherhood, and this history, you want to say that it jives with the one that we got in the Akashic Tradition book in 1E, but it doesn't for two reasons. One, that book was on meth, and it just ran through everything. It's like, oh yeah, we have warrior monks in cloud fortresses that have the ability to punch through walls, and we run secret underground fighting rings, not because we're informed by Street Fighter and we want to beat up people in back alleys, but because it helps refine our souls. And you're like, yeah, that's a good excuse. And also because a lot of the groups they are listed as interacting with didn't exist in Mage yet. That book has no information about the Wulong because they didn't exist yet. It starts with a basic history where they talk about the ancient old pure ones that were given the duty of defending the earth and keeping order to things. And they present the Akashic Brotherhood as kind of having fallen. It happened with the Akashics. That was seemingly a long time ago. They once held all of creation in balance and the secrets of that, and they were either hunted down because they were so awesome, or they took their secrets of being awesome and turned them towards personal gain. They failed to stop the technocracy, and then nationalism completely tore them apart. They walked through Akashic philosophy. This I did appreciate because, unlike the previous tradition book, it is very condensed, and I think approachable. Hopefully it's accurate too. They present the idea of drama, or the Yang principle, that all problems have an efficient and moral solution, and that mages are people that have access to those efficient and moral solutions. That Do is the application of the drama to mind and body, which I liked as an idea because they're like, oh yeah, mind and body, great. They present the idea that you can, in certain cases with certain skills, you can meditate on them, and then by spending a point of willpower, you can add your Do rating to your dice pool. It also brings up the idea of Akashic karma. It reiterates this fact that thoughts and acts leave impressions on the tapestry, and that when a Akashic member, a member of the Akashiana, is plumbing the Akashic record, they're really just going through some symbolic representation of those records on reality. We get an update on the factions. In the tradition book, we only get 4, one for each essence type, and here we get a few more. We don't get much information on how individual subsects interact with other groups. We get an aside on the 5 elements, and instead of having earth, fire, wind, and water from Greek inspiration, we get the idea of fire, earth, metal, water, and wood, that each has another element that it strengthens, another element that it diminishes, and a way that each flows into another element through some transformational process. It gives ties to organs and spiritual properties and so on, and that is a useful reference for storytellers who are trying to come up with associations that they can have to have appropriate ties to use as a focus. One of the recurring things in this book is I am just not impressed by most of the rotes that they give. One of them is the idea of Gatha, which is this rote allows a Akashic poet to weave an emotion into their work, and it is Mind 2, Prime 2. The Prime is listed as being required to cause the effect to persist, but that is the entire reason that Revised introduced the duration and damage chart.
Yeah, I got to agree with that one. The Akashic Brotherhood got 4 sects in the first edition of Mage, and the first edition Akashic sects did not work for me. So I really didn't mind at all when Revised Edition said, we're tossing those out, we're doing new sects. And they gave the names, and they gave some brief information in the core book, but they expand upon that here. Now, as I was reading through it, I think 2 of the groups are given sort of duties within the tradition, which I thought was pretty cool, but then the other 2 or 3 do not have those duties, so I guess it was a theme that they didn't stick with too strong. But still, I think it's helpful for storytellers if they want to carry that through or not with the other groups. I could be wrong, but I believe this book is the first time that we get the term Akashayana as a name for the Akashic Brotherhood. And that becomes the official name of this tradition in Mage 20. I disagree with the notion of placing the samurai tradition of Japan inside of the Akashic Brotherhood. This is just me, and it's just personal preference here, but when I read about Bushido and samurai in history in Japan, and when I look at the Akashic Brotherhood, I don't see a fit. I see 2 groups that are not going to be at war with each other, but they just don't belong together, and so I I take that out. But of course, Mage fans are free to do what they think works best. However, not long after this, the revised tradition book for Akashic Brotherhood is going to be published, where we get more detail about the sects. And then we get Guide to the Traditions, which gives us more information on the Akashic Brotherhood. So this tradition is very well covered in a short period of time in Revised Edition.
The other two main groups it reiterates are the Wulong and the Wukang. The Wulong come out of the legalist tradition of a very bureaucratic kind of magic, that mages act as the intermediaries between heaven and earth, and by knowing how to properly interface with both, they are able to manipulate or deal with both. They're incredibly hierarchical. They are just as arrogant as any Western mage could possibly be. They even go so far as to view anyone who is not Chinese as barbarians, which I found a delightful recurring theme in the book, when it's just like, the barbarians, and you're like, oh, so you're talking about like the Huns, and you're like, no, that's literally everyone who's not Han Chinese. Pretty wide remit for barbarian. I'll try and remember that.
Just to interject, this is probably a good point to interject. When I was a student in Japan in my college days, I learned the Japanese equivalent of the term Southern barbarians, which really means any foreigners, especially from Europe. And so it's Yabanjin. And so a couple of times I introduced myself as a Yabanjin, and the Japanese got so flustered and so put out that I started, okay, maybe my joke is going a little too far here. Apparently that's a little outside of what's apropos. But the term does exist in Japanese as well as Chinese, and so the tradition is there, I thought.
The Wulong started to gain considerable amount of power when the government of China was more centralized and court intrigue and politics became big. They were eventually fractured during the rise of Confucius. The Akashics won over many of their adherents with their fusion of legalism and ethics. The way legalism is presented in the book is the idea not of strict bureaucracy, but that the leader should use whatever levers of power they have access to within whatever political systems they have to maximize personal power. And that is the definition of legalism this book uses. So when it talks about the fusion of legalism and ethics, that is where we get more of an idea of modern bureaucracy, that there is an organized system of law, that it is everyone's role to adhere to it. And even if you don't like the outcome, it is more important to adhere to the system because it gives reliable outcomes. And that system can be modified over time than it is to just kind of throw up your hands and be like, I don't like this. This isn't just.
There's also the notion that when there is order and not war, the people of the nation prosper, and so order at all costs. If you have to crack a few skulls to have order, it's worth it in the end, I think is one of the basic ideas here. That's what makes it ethical. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, it's just the idea here.
The interaction between the Wukang, the Wulong, and the Akashics is a long and storied one where each one is kind of fighting for power until modernity. But generally when one advances, it is at the cost of another. And it says, as basically we approach modernity, they have been largely reduced to Hong Kong plus Chinese communities abroad. So they actually in the 20th century, in the late 20th century and the 21st century, have a very broad power base that is just no longer located throughout the entirety of China. That was kind of interesting. Another theme the book drops versus how it is presented, at least in other books, is the idea that China is kind of a mystery to the technocracy, that they really thought that in the wake of World War II, this was going to be a golden opportunity to have this perfectly technocratic nation, but you have the rise of communism and that no magical faction has dominance at that point, which is an idea that I did not find in this book that I thought was interesting. I don't know if necessarily world history would recapitulate that, but I thought it was interesting. The philosophical point that I think made the least sense, but could also be the most interesting, as is often the case, is they represent the idea that you need to have the respect of others to increase your arete. You need to follow these rules. They will garner other people's respect for you, and through that, you can go through the inner journey with the guidance of your ancestor to advance your magical power. And that is interesting to me because normally the avatar and your arete rating is something that a mage refines themselves. It represents a personal quest to become a better person in some way. But here it is this idea that you need external validation to advance your arete, and I thought that was interesting. I don't know if I would necessarily use that, and that's one of those things where a character can certainly think that, but that may not be the actuality of it. But it was an interesting way of presenting things. The organization is led by the Heavenly Emperor of the Dragon Wizards, who is gone, or no one has talked to this person. They have been in place for 1,000 years, and their goal is to appease the august personage of Jade. Historically, there has been one female member of the Wulong, the Phoenix Empress Wizard, who tempers the justice of the Heavenly Emperor with mercy, has reincarnated as their own daughter 300 times. This cycle is later indicated as taking 108 years, which suggests that the Wulong have been around for at least 35,000 years. They also have an aside that says, oh, by the way, the current Phoenix Empress Wizard is in the body of an 8-year-old schoolboy, that there are 9 lords within the group that oversee the various types of magic. They have hierarchy upon hierarchy upon hierarchy. It is composed of a dragon school, a tiger school, and a phoenix school. The dragon school acts as heavenly judges and liaisons between the kingdom and the bureaucracy. A lot of their members have left to join the metal dragons to their eternal shame. The tiger school studies etiquette, strategy, and swordsmanship. And I like that they indicate that they learn swordsmanship to generate bravery. I'm like, I didn't know that's how that worked. And it's also, as an aside, they're like, they also support women's rights. I'm like, that's good. Finally, you have the Phoenix School, which was all men until the 1800s. And since that reincarnation cycle has been going on for a while, that suggests they've been around for at least 32,400 years. Their magic is very formal, based on the idea that the soul consists of 2 parts, the Po and the Hun. One of the interesting things they mentioned is that they tend to use small paper charms, portraits, tablets, things to remind them of their ancestors. The I Ching is very important. Swords and alchemy become very important, as are offerings of food and drink to the appropriate gods and ancestors. And then we get to the magic section. So Adam, it's a new edition of the book, and if I were to ask you, hey Adam, if I'm a mage and I want to get from point A to point B quickly, what sphere do you think that would use?
Ooh, I'm gonna say correspondence, but
yeah. Well, you would be wrong, because the most effective way to get from point A to B is with a route called Thunderbridge, which is Forces 3 Prime 2, where you ride a lightning bolt to your destination.
Are your pants going to be okay after that?
No, actually, it kind of is interesting, because it specifically suggests that based on the number of successes you get, if somebody touches you while you're on your lightning bolt, while you're riding the lightning, which is not what this means at all. If you're a Metallica fan, they will take forces damage from touching your magical flying lightning bolt. Optionally, you can include Matter 2, which does what? Adds Matter 2. I have no idea how that was supposed to work. A lot of these routes require spheres that I can't really justify. I also like the Correspondence 4 route, where you open a gateway to the sun's photosphere to kill someone.
Oh yeah, nothing could go wrong there.
Yeah, and it requires at least 15 successes. So the thing that gets me about that is, like, okay, you flood an area with sunlight, but like it takes hours to prepare, and one of the requirements is a carved gateway with 9 jade dragons on it. Like, I understand that you could carry around the I Ching, but you're like, hey Mark, yeah, why do you have that giant jade gateway with 9 dragons on it that you carry with you everywhere? Oh, no reason.
Okay, I've attracted the Kuei Jin here. Are you ready? So I'm carving the dragons. Just hold on.
Exactly.
Just keep them busy. Distract them.
Yeah.
I like that they updated them for the events of Revised Edition here. I think that's very useful. I think it serves well as both an introduction to people who are only working with Revised Edition, and also an update for people, and a bit of an expansion for people who have the older material. But I tend to do something a little different with them in my Chronicles, but I'll just put that in the Overflow episode.
The last group The last large group presented are the Wukang. And if you are interested in much more conversation about the Wukang, BK and I at the Midnight Express literally did a 1 hour and 45-minute conversation on just the Wukang. So if you're like, why do they need to do an overflow episode? Adam may talk about his experience with Mage in Asia. We spent a little bit under 2 hours on this one group. So I am going to partially present the Wukang in contrast to the two other groups that we discussed so far, the Akashics and the Wulong. This section in the book switches to first person, where it's like, well, this is a weird group of cross-dressing demon worshippers, so we're going to make this easier for you by putting it in the first person. And you're like, oh, thanks, book. The Wukang represent the shamanic and spiritual traditions of China, that before the rise of legalism and before the rise of Buddhism and before the rise of Confucianism and Taoism, that there were the traditional practices of people worshiping the land, attending to the spirits of it, and them granting power. That magic was done by wooing one of these spirits, going into the celestial garden, plucking a flower from it, which represented the magical effect, and then returning to the mortal realm, at least spiritually, to cause a change in the world. That as the Wulong were gaining in power, they were dropping. And in a desperate plea, the group that became the Wukang made a promise to the Prince of the Fengtu, Lord of the Thousand Tears, to offer their souls, more or less, in exchange for that entity's help. And the agreement was, I will grant you power, but for 3,000 years you must serve me, the Samchin Ak. This 3,000-year period of service was broken up into a period of silence, a period of observation, and then a period of action, each of them 1,000 years long. This promise was made roughly around 1000 BCE, so theoretically, as of the year 2000, this agreement should be expiring or just about to expire. To get this power, they have to offer up their avatar to form a jade bracelet, which is held by the infernal lords that control them. At some point, the Wulong rise in power and are pursuing immortality, and they notice that the founding members of the Wukang have not aged. So the leaders of the Wulong, in an attempt to get these secrets of immortality, start boiling them alive, one by one, until they promise to give up the secret. They call out to their demonic master. Their demonic master delivers them and says, in exchange for this, since you are wed to me, you must now dress as women, and you must bind and break your feet to indicate that you are hobbled to me. And then for the next little over 2,000 years, they continue to serve their demon lords. With the time of judgment upon us, with the coming of the Avatar Storm, they have kind of lost that immediate connection. Like, the demons are having more difficulty in keeping track of their worshippers, and it is suggested that the demons are powered by the worship and pain that the Wukang bring upon themselves to keep up their part of the bargain. This bargain is supposed to expire, but during the Avatar Storm, since they lost connection, some members have been teaching themselves the forbidden arts of spirit and time. And their spirit overlords have said, your 3,000-year period will not end until you find these rogue people and kill them. So there's this internal war between the people who are trying to get out of this, trying to finish up this agreement by finishing out the terms, and need to track down the renegade mages, and those who don't think they will ever be granted their freedom, and they need to gain the tools of power themselves to rise up and kill them. Whoever came up with the rotes and whoever came up with the investments was on point. A lot of cases, the magic is needlessly flowery or needlessly complicated, but you know what? If I wanted something that wasn't needlessly complicated, I wouldn't be playing mage. So one of them is the ability to summon a weapon out of nowhere, the Kiss of the Virtuous Maiden. You can spit out a sword at someone, and I just think that's kind of cool. There's one where you cause the entire world to go into chaos, and you use your mastery of correspondence and entropy to be able to traverse that area without difficulty. At the low levels, you go from point A to point B through a random walk. At 4 points, you can bring friends, and at 5 points, you tear space-time up. Does it do anything extra? No, but it probably looks really cool. And the rotes in general focus on the idea that you are part of a family unit, that you are married to a demon of some sort, and what flows from that I think is pretty neat. In addition to that, we also get a set of investments, which are things that characters, in exchange for the fact that they have promised their soul to a demon, get a bunch of cool powers. I thought these were kind of neat. One of them was the Stove God's Meal, which is a 2-point investment that you gain the simple but useful power of all who eat a meal that you have prepared are forever unable to speak ill of you. That's an interesting one. So I found this section to be fascinating. You also have Concubine's Laugh, where you can look someone in the eye and know their most shameful secret. Yeah, that would terrify me if I knew that to exist. The ultimate status of the Wukang, the Wulong, and the Akashics at the end of the 20th century is kind of interesting because of the advance of Chinese communism, the Wulong and the Wukang have both basically retreated to Hong Kong, and both of them are convinced that the other one has control over the rest of China. There's also the parallel that at the end of the day, the Wukang and the Wulong are both basically worshipping demons. It is established within the line that Qingxi Huangdi, the first member of the Wulong, or at least that's what they claim, when they descended into the afterlife, was quickly replaced with a demon of some sort that has been using the worship of that figure, the Yellow Emperor, for the last several millennia to harvest souls and power in the Yellow Springs, the Dark Kingdom that represents East Asia.
Well, the Stove's God Meal does explain one thing. Terry shared a chocolate chip cookie recipe with me, which was really great. And after I served that to my kids and had a little more than I should have, I stopped bad-mouthing them on the internet. So I get it now. I understand what's going on here.
Chapter 4 is entitled Bounteous Diversity and covers two things. It covers what the traditions are like in East Asia, as well as other non-tradition groups. Of the Asia Big, Asia Old summary of this book, this is the Asia Big portion. It mentions specifically that all groups have a presence here. I guess the start of the portion of the book where I just kind of ignored certain sections. This book is 20 years old, and to be like, but Terry, things have changed elsewhere. I understand. Between this book coming out and now, the population of Asia has increased by 50%. So in the past 20 years in the United States, our population has increased by 50% since 1970. I think a not unreasonable analog would be like, if I were to pick up a mage book notionally written in 1970, what would I think about the content and how would I want to use that at the table? We have dealt with a expansion of economic power that in some areas has tripled. A new caveat for a new chapter. It walks through the traditions and where they have strongholds and where they don't. It mentions, for instance, the Celestial Chorus have a very old presence in Bali, Indonesia, and on the Philippines as well, that they were welcome for a long time until the 18th century, where they were just viewed as another part of Western imperialism. New groups within the cult of ecstasy, or groups we haven't really heard much from, the Chinese Kalu, the Taoist mages that combine sex and martial arts. And I'm like, okay, you have me curious. We get our first mention of Mariana of Balador in Revised, saying that she is the leader of the Children's Crusade, which is a group to stop child abuse and child trafficking throughout Asia. And she is the tacit endorsement of the Technocracy, which is a book I want to see, regarding Mariana of Balador and like a cyborg teaming up as like this weird buddy cop drama to stop bad things happening to children. The Dream Speakers, that traditionally the group is considered to be Sub-Saharan Africa, the Americas, and Australia, but there are indigenous peoples everywhere, and it goes through a bunch of examples of that. It brings up that the Thanatoi are largely unwelcome since the Himalayan War, which was the large war between the Akashics and the Euthanatoi between 900 and 300 BCE. It mentions that no one likes the Order of Hermes. Everyone take a drink. That they have a presence in Tokyo. Normally, we're like, why you got to beat up on the Order of Hermes? But on the plus side, it represents the Wulong as being just as arrogant as the Hermetics. Like, they could go toe-to-toe with each other.
There was one sidebar in this section talking about the House of Crimson Thunder, and this was a new idea of a small fledgling house of the Order of Hermes, perhaps not official yet, that is operating in Hong Kong, and they are working to take ideas from Western Hermetic lore and also from Chinese Eastern lore and combine the two. And in the sidebar, it doesn't say how they combine the two or what that would look like. And That is not a bug, that's a feature. I think this is a really great little addition here. I think Mage is a game where people should be encouraged to play with ideas, and I think it's just a lot of fun for a storyteller should say to a player, hey, do 20 minutes of internet research, find some things, and then combine them. Play with it. See what you come up with. And as a player, you're free to do that for your character. And if the player says, well, I don't want to do that, well, there's a lot of other houses in the Order of Hermes. So I just think it's fun to hand that to a player and say, I don't know, you think of something.
They mentioned the Sons of Ether were the first over during the Meiji Restoration, and it really makes it feel like the over-eager anime club member, where they're like, hey guys, thanks for letting us in. Do you want to hear about science? I have a bunch of figurines that I made. And I think my favorite part is when they talk about the Verbena who are like, you know what? We're going to try and recruit the Wu Kang. And I'm like, good luck with that. What could possibly go wrong? They talk about that during the founding of the tradition that Hesha Nightshade went west and Groth went east. Groth I don't remember ever hearing about before, and Groth disappeared, and periodically people were like, well, it didn't work out for Groth. Maybe I should try the exact same thing. And you're like, really? Is that what we want to do? The final group they mentioned, of course, are the Virtual Adepts, which say that this is only a recent thing, that they're looking at talking with other hypertech groups. And then it goes into the secret societies.
There are 4 new groups written for this book. There's the Go Kamisori Gama. Starting in 1864, this Japanese group used their martial arts, magic, and cutting-edge technology for assassination, spying, theft, bodyguard duty, and security consulting. Although they have no connection to real ninja, they have adopted that image. No goals are stated in the write-up other than keeping themselves secret and making money. They get access to high-tech equipment and even cybernetic implants through their underworld contacts, who turn out to be a group within the 5 Metal Dragons. That's the Asian Technocracy. As a result, the 5 Metal Dragons know much about the Go Kamisori Gama's doings. We also have the Tokfan. In the 9th century, in what is today Cambodia, priests and warriors of Devaraja cults served the Khmer god kings. They performed bloody rites that served the rulers and held the citizens in check. In time, that religion fell out of favor with both the rulers and the citizens. Centuries later, the inheritors of the Tokfan lacked influence and the full knowledge of their past rituals. They devoted themselves to one of the Yama kings for power and soon found themselves involved in gruesome practices. They supported the Khmer Rouge in the 1970s and increased the body count to ensure a supply of victims for their arts. They are now ensnared in a deal with dark powers they wish they could escape. They engage in cannibalism but feel bad about it, so they aren't all bad, I guess. They recruit the worst kind of criminals for acolytes, have infernal investments, and search for a way to return to the original magic they practiced in past centuries. We have the Tai Hoi Lee. This group is a mystery to outsiders. Started by Vietnamese farmers trapped in the underground Cu Chi tunnels during the Vietnam conflict of the 1970s, they remain in that tunnel system to this day. Their leader is said to be a blind farmer named Tai Hoi. Members occasionally emerge to quietly buy food and other necessary items, but they refuse to answer questions, and magic used to gain information from them never works. All attempts to magically scry on their underground layers meets a cold, smooth barrier that no one can breach. Some members of this group gouge out their own eyes, while others are born blind or even born without eyes. Their goals are unknown, and the mystic ability they've developed in just 30 years has some mages worried. Finally, we have the Sons of Tengri, Mongolian shamans who have suffered severely from Buddhism's spread in the past and the technocracy spread in recent times. The group became an underground movement long ago when Buddhism became prominent and had to hide even better when technocrats began oppressing them in 1924. Their leaders were killed by technocrats in 1982, but young members continued recruiting new members. Their magic is similar to dream speaker practices, but they do not link themselves to totem spirits. They have a special reverence for Tengri, god of the heavens, and Itugen, the Earth Mother. Recent political changes in Mongolia are granting them more freedom, and they have hope for the future.
Of the groups that are presented, I think the Tokfan are probably one of the most fascinating, because they make that aside. As Adam mentioned, they're cannibals, but they feel bad about it. Like, it makes it sound like a children's story, like The Very Guilty Cannibal. And it just shows you like someone with like an arm sticking out of their mouth, and they're like, and they have like a sad face on. But the idea here is they're not sure if this was part of their curse or just the way the cosmos works, but every time they eat a person, the good part of that person's like essence gets lodged in the person who ate them. So the more people they eat, the worse they feel about it. and they're not sure if that is specifically a curse or the way the universe works. And it also has the line like, auto-cannibalism is an appropriate form of worship, but often self-limiting. And I'm like, yeah, that's
I
one
see
way
what
to
you
put
did
it.
there.
Yeah. The person that has to deal with the Yama King is generally a magically potent but socially ignorant person, where they're like, oh crap, the Yama King wants to talk to us. We don't want him to know that we're figured out what's going around. Get one of the new guys.
Yeah.
So
the ancient manifestation of horrible evil and cannibalism. You go talk to him. What, me? Huh? I just got here. It'll be fine.
I thought those groups were super interesting, and if any of them sound vaguely cool, learn more at your local library. No, follow up and read.
For me, the Asian secret societies were, yes, very interesting. I just wish that the section had been longer. It would have been nice to get a few more. This is one of the reasons I come down hard on the first 2 chapters, because if you devote that page count to later chapters, we can have more secret societies, which I think would just be really interesting. For the Tai Hoi Lee, I see that they're meant to be an NPC group. They're not intended for player characters. But I think it is so cool to have like this mystery, which like nobody knows. Storytellers, you fill this out and put what you want in here. I like stuff like that. And as for the Sons of Tengri, I think they're interesting, and I think they work for that region. But the problem with the Sons of Tengri is, if I'm running a mage game that is not based in Tibet, I don't have a strong motivation to use the Sons of Tengri. I just don't see where they fit into much of anything outside of Tibet.
As you had mentioned about the Tai Hoi Lee, it's a lot of good to me NPC groups. And sometimes the flavor gets in the way. So one of the interesting ideas is that Mongolia was used as a test bed for a lot of communist ideas, and it disrupted native lifestyles. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So we have this area where maybe the Umbra is in disarray, and that could be a really interesting place globally to pursue, or that there may be artifacts or places of magic that have kind of been abandoned. But later, they're like, oh, no 2 masters are ever under the same roof. That's interesting, but kind of arbitrary and maybe hard to remember. Again, they're like, gender equality. I'm like, yeah, get him. Mongolia. The next section is the Chinta and the Shen, and the Shen is the generic term for supernatural creatures, or what in M20 we start referring to as night folk. They are generally on better terms with one another, like the Kuijin, the spirit vampires, and the Hengiokai, the changing beasts, are likely on better terms than their Western equivalents, which is fine. And it makes a note that says, hey, don't turn it into the Legion of Super Monsters. And then it gives you a whole bunch of examples where it was the Legions of Super Monsters, which mage books are really good at. The Kuijin, or sometimes referred to as the Wankue, are the members of the cursed 10,000 immortals that, after they learn to harness chi towards what then became their corrupt ends, receive the curse of the august personage of Jade, that after a certain period of torment, they have clawed their way out of one of the hells and is a spirit inhabiting a body. They need to continually drink chi, or the breath of others, to continue to their unexistence, and eventually they can go through a purification process whereby they are able to free themselves from that curse. The best known Kuijin are the 3 bodhisattva that are involved in fighting the Ravno antediluvian that rises during the week of nightmares. That may be the most World of Darkness sentence I have ever said before.
You're one of us now.
Yeah. Crap. These creatures have been around for thousands of years. They mention that most chantries will have a single member, an elderly member, that knows how to deal with them, at least diplomatically. And then it does the thing where it's like, oh, but most of the masters are gone, so I guess the new guy's going to have to do it. They were very competitive with the Wulong, as each tried to compete to rule the courts of China. If you're looking for more information, this is a case where the White Wolf Wiki is just great. It gives you all the powers, and you can be like, okay, I'll take these 3 and I'll run with it. The next is on the Hengiokai, which are the shifters, or the changing breeds of Asia, and they all have different names. One that we don't really get as much in the West are the Kitsune, who are the were-foxes. They believe that if they learn sphere magic, they will be able to unravel the history and truths of creation. The little in-world fiction it has there suggests that they are willing to use very potent methods to try and do it. Often they are competitors and lovers to mages, and I'm like, okay, how about that?
I enjoyed this element of the book where they said that the kitsune, the werefoxes, they don't know that they can't learn sphere magic. They think somehow that if they just do the right thing or drink the right stuff or perform the right ritual, then they'll be able to learn sphere magic. And they think, yeah, we'll really be able to go places after that. And so they are intensely curious of mages. They want to be around them. They want to capture them. Sometimes they capture mages and torture the secrets out of them. Sometimes they just spend a lot of time with mages. Sometimes they have these little ploys where they're going to pretend that they've got the goods on the mages, and while the mages sweat bullets, they say, we'll let you out if you tell us your secrets. And I just like having this motivation, this explanation for why the kitsune and mages of East Asia are going to get together. As a storyteller, I would have fun with that. I like it.
It mentions that there is kind of a secret were-rat empire beneath Asia, which I thought was kind of cool. And they're like, yeah, get in there, Nezumi. The were-ravens are represented as master swordsmen, even though in most of Werewolf, the were-ravens are considered like to be awkward and gangly. Like, they make okay people, they make okay ravens, but in between it's like the worst of both worlds. The section on the Naga, the were-snakes, I will read in its entirety. No living mage has ever seen a Naga. Interpret that as you will. And then finally we get a section on the Kumo, which are spider servants of the Yama Kings, which is interesting because their Western equivalent, the Ananasi, are not represented as serving the worm. They're represented as serving the weaver. I don't know if the role of the Yama Kings is a bit more complicated than I'm giving it credit for, or if these are just bad were spiders.
I really liked the were spiders. I thought that was just awesome. And of course they've shown up in anime, and I've seen them a few places there, but there was one old legend from Japan that I read a translation of where a samurai was dealing with supernatural forces in a rural place, and when he finally got to the bottom of it and beat everything, he found that it was spiders that was causing it. And it was just so funny how the legend ended. It said he basically slumped his shoulders and said, all right. And he had to spend all night basically isolating all the spiders and burning them all or stomping them all. It was like an anticlimactic end to the legend. That it was like, yeah, darn spiders, got to kill everyone. But putting that aside, I thought the were spiders, I always like to bring them into my mage games. It's one of the villain NPCs I really like to play with. I mean, just that image of some person who grows into a giant monster spider and then melts into a cloud of tiny spiders going in every direction. I think there's horror factor there. There's a challenge for combat-oriented mages. I think it's just so much fun to use, and I loved seeing them here. I want to use them as villains in my games.
There's a brief section on the Restless Dead, and the underworld of East Asia is wildly imperialist. The Yellow Springs is dominated by the Yellow Emperor, who basically views it as, if you are Chinese and your family has made appropriate sacrifices, you get to be here. Everyone else will be soul-forged or turned into white jade. It does mention that despite the wall having thickened, which is to say the Avatar Storm, people are still able to contact the dead. It doesn't really make mention to the Sixth Great Maelstrom, but meh. The next section it goes through are the Hsien, which are often listed as the changeling analog in East Asia, but they're really a different thing entirely. The idea is that they are spirits that are either noble or commoners that are part of the celestial bureaucracy whose job is to fulfill mortal wishes, that instead of getting glamour by inspiring art, by doing little requests and following very specific rules of etiquette and such, that is how that they can replenish the power that allows them to operate. They're considered to be elemental. They are often tied to the land, and they are enemies of the metal dragons in this Captain Planet, like the metal dragons don't care about the environment, and the Hsien are spirits of it, so we need to deal with them, and they're causing problems, and suggested that at some point that may boil over. We get a brief section on different spirit entities that may exist. We get the Kyrene, we get the Fu Lions, and we get a Kappa. Of spirits, when I think of East Asia, those are kind of the first ones that come to mind. There is a section on the Yama Kings and what they do, that each one kind of rules over some sort of wicked hell realm where an ironic punishment or is delivered upon people. Mikaboshi, Lord of the Wicked City, is listed as having formerly been a member of the Dalou'laoshi, and has this cyber realm that would make Iteration X weep. We get a example of demon and of iron and violence, which is interesting as weapons-wise, they are listed as having both retractable claws and an assault rifle. And I'm like, okay, that is how you mix the traditional with the modern. And it gives you some ideas of what different Asian demons would kind of look like. And by Asian in this case, I again mean just a particular area of East Asia. We then finally get the hunters, the mortal forces or other supernatural forces who try and keep things in check. Here it is interesting in noting that there is no masquerade or veil, and that the Shen are expected to keep track of their own members. But if people step out of line, that there are various forces to keep them in check. The largest they list is the Ministry of Public Security, which is kind of the equivalent of the FBI SAD, which doesn't really pop up in Mage, the Special Affairs Division, which is the portion of the government that kind of knows that there's other things happening. Finally, they spend a good amount of space talking about the Shi, which are a group of harshly trained mortals who gain access to mystical abilities to take vengeance on the Shen. What'd you think about Chapter 4?
Well, just to round out Chapter 4, I liked the mythic beasts. I agree they went for the low-hanging fruit. They went for 3 of the most obvious. But I think they did a good job. I like the write-ups. I would probably use them in my games. From my time living in Japan, I kept seeing the kappa shown as cute, cartoony pals that young children play with on the playground. It's like, oh man, that's so dumb. But here they made him scary, and it's like, yeah, okay, thanks. That's better. I wish there would have been more, but what is here, I would probably use. I really like the mention of the Goblin Slayers. This is a secret underground group of regular humans who are kidnapped when quite young by Tengu, which they say here are the Koraks, the were-ravens of the Far East. The Goblin Slayers work to train in martial arts, in hedge magic, perhaps in sphere magic when they can, and they go hunting down the monsters that terrorize normal people. I thought it was nice to include the new enemy soldier templates like Bakemono, Plague Zombie, Demon of Iron and Violence. Even if thematically they might have been a bit odd, I like having those enemy templates that are different from ones that came before that a storyteller can work with. And most storytellers I've talked to, they take that template, they make some minor adjustments, and they run with it, and they're just glad to have some stats and powers to fall back on. So it's nice to do that for storytellers.
Chapter 5 is on the 5 elemental dragons. So this is a long-ish chapter, and it tries to explain what the 5 elemental dragons are. And one of the recurring ideas here is that you have the 5 metal dragons, which is the term used to describe the 5 conventions of the Technocracy. And I am wondering if before the virtual adepts left, if it was the 6 metal dragons. The idea here is that they are either the Eastern analog of the Order of Reason, but they are some sort of collection of groups that were interested in making sure that society was done orderly, that chi was controlled, and that culture and tradition were in some way preserved. So they aren't necessarily as overtly technological as their Western counterparts, that they did a good job of managing things, but unlike, again, their Western counterparts, instead of gaining ascendancy during the 14th century at the Convention of the White Tower, they are viewed as having taken a large setback when the Mongol invasion occurred and the Khmer Empire collapsed. Westerners arrived in the 16th century in large numbers. They kind of took their lumps for a bit until they were able to reorganize and rebrand, as it were, to get rid of a lot of the previous cultural hindrances they had against working together. Many internal disagreements still exist. There are 5 groups. And one of the things that one should resist doing is trying to directly map any group onto a Western analog. They do different things. They have different goals. They are different, which requires more of a cognitive lift. But I think that ultimately makes them more interesting. The chapter also includes a list of problems that a game that focused on the 5 elemental dragons can involve. To me, the core question of the chapter is, how do you want to portray the relationship between the Technocracy and the 5 elemental dragons? It kind of lists that they are apart and separate and within and aside from, all at the same time. It's one of the few cases where we get a hard number for the number of technocratic agents, and it mentions that there's like 4 NWO operatives or something like that in all of China. And figuring out that relationship, are they a subgroup? Are they just like an identity group? The feeling I got was if someone were to ask them, are you a part of the Technocracy? The response they'll give is, sure. Adam, did you have any clarity on how you'd portray that relationship between the two?
I think I can understand the intention here. However, the way Chapter 5 was written up, it is confusing, and I think it does require a storyteller to give their interpretation. And to be specific, what I mean by that is in the history section, it's saying that when the Western technocracy came in roughly 1700s, 1800s, the Eastern, you could call them the five metal dragons, but basically the five elemental dragons are the five different groups of mages who have been in China especially, but in East Asia, for a long time, and they believe more in order, in reason, in societal order, and that kind of thing. And so when the technocracy came in the 1700s and 1800s, the two large groups found common cause and got together. They saw the benefit of what each other had there. The five elemental dragons had local knowledge, and the technocracy had amazing technology, and so they said, let's get together. And in past mage books, that was the idea we were given. It's like basically those guys in the East and those guys in the West found common cause, they got together, and it was kind of a positive thing here. It's like we can work together even though we're from different places. And in this book, it gives the notion that there's a conspiracy within a conspiracy. The technocracy is a conspiracy from sleepers, and the five elemental dragons are maintaining a conspiracy against the Western technocracy. And that is that they said, yes, we're going to join you. We're going to filter our members into your five conventions and let it be that way. But secretly, we're not telling you that we're maintaining our old identity. We're maintaining our old affiliations. We have clubhouse meetings for our five elemental dragon groups, and we don't tell you about that. And so it says that they maintain this, one, through telling the technocracy, don't send your people to Asia. We'll recruit locally. We've got our own guys. We've got this covered. We don't want to make any drains on your personnel. And the other way that they accomplish this is it says that one of the five elemental dragon groups is the Miao Guan, and they specialize in the mind sphere. They're just really good at it. They are so good at it that the New World Order and other Western technocrats have not pierced through the deception. But also in this same chapter of this book, it says that because of the Avatar Storm and the recent events in the world of darkness, mainly that magic is getting harder and old magic is not as reliable as it used to be, it says that Miao Guan mental techniques are breaking down. They're just not working like they used to, and so they're having a hard time maintaining the deception. And so they've basically said to the Western technocracy, yeah, we were holding back some secrets, but we meant no harm, and we'll stop doing it, and so it's not so bad. But then as you continue to read the rest of Chapter 5, it shifts back into that mode of this is all a secret that we're keeping from the Western technocrats. And so the reader is left wondering, well, which is it? Is the deception in the open now, or is it still a deception? And that's up for storytellers to interpret. I guess I wasn't pleased that it was a bit confusing while I was reading through it, but being told that I can interpret this as I like as a storyteller, I'm okay with that.
It talks about the Sukahara doing high-profit crime, which is perennially an enemy, that they're kind of have a war with the NWO, where one is trying to, each is trying to wipe out each other, dealing with the Chinese tongs and street gangs being difficult. They talk about the Asian financial crisis, which at this point is a fair bit in the past. The disruption of natural cycles, the problem of the generation gap, the Western culture infiltrating, that there's been an uptick in the number of marauders. The other Shen are getting kind of restless, that they have a hatred of the Wulong and tend to ignore the Wu Kang, but also that it is important that all of their members stay educated and everyone needs to get a new degree every 10 years. If you're curious what time and place this came out of, there's a section where the technocrats are talking about how good the Taliban are at their job. This book came out in 2000. Take that for what it is. It's going to be even more fun when we get to Lost Paths. We get a bunch of new bits of equipment, which don't quite make sense in a lot of cases. There's these organic metallic steel tigers on which we get no stats that have the ability to spring into action. We get the idea that there is a network of chi-laced vending machines, that a injured agent with an arm computer has the ability to go, I need Red Bull. And their pocket device will guide them to the latest thing. And it's like, these are rare. There are only thousands of them spread throughout, and each one contains 10 points of cheese. Also, the fact that each vending machine has 10 dice in counter magic. That is a well-defended vending machine.
It says that these vending machines are spread throughout large and middle-sized cities. They're very accessible. It's a perk for members of the East Asian Technocracy. It has so much chi, that is quintessence, in them, and each one has 10 dice of counter magic. Every single one of these vending machines is a potent wonder in mage rules, and each one of those would be quite a considerable investment for mages to create. And so to say that they're scattered all over cities, I find this stretches things a little too far. They make the joke, which was common back in 2000. A lot of Western journalists were talking about how they have vending machines for everything in Japan. Isn't it wild? And I was in Japan in 2000, and I gotta say, it was a little wild. You could find all kinds of crazy things in vending machines. I was teaching at night at a cram school, and so I went out into this really narrow little alleyway between apartment buildings. There's a great big, very well lit up vending machine for beer, and there were great big cans of beer. I mean, it was like getting 3 cans out of a 6-pack of beer there. And it was just, you put the money in, it comes out. And I was thinking to myself, okay, wait a minute. We're 2 blocks from a high school. We're 1 block from a cram school. Who thought of this? Whoever it is, they should be given a raise for bringing more profit into the company, and then they should be sent to jail for interfering with minors.
The apex of that was, I think in the early 2000s, someone produced a vending machine that vended vending machines. It was just this absolutely massive thing where if you wanted a soda one or a water one or a candy one or a whatever one, you could buy a vending machine out of a vending machine. I'm like, okay, this is the future. Blade Runner warned me about this. I would love to hear more about who are the 5 elemental dragons themselves.
Well, there are 5 groups. We start off with the Ziguang. Their traditional name is the Temple of the Eternal Mountain. They are associated with the East Asian element of wood. They are primarily located in China, but not only China. Specializing in the life sphere, these technomancers claim credit for teaching sleepers to properly cultivate rice. Originally focused on geomancy, they used their life arts to evaluate chi in humans and determine the state of local chi flows. In time, they focused on humans more, with 2 results. Some worked to strengthen and perfect the human body, others focused on perfecting government. The Ziguang are involved with the Chinese government and see it as their preferred tool. Many Ziguang are fascinated by progenitor technology. They are among the more conservative of the elemental dragons, but have members that seek innovation in government and biotech. Next up, we have the Sayan Saying. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I'm sorry. It comes from Korean, and I just don't know Korean. This was traditionally called the Court of the Chrysanthemums. They are associated with the element of earth. They are primarily located in South Korea, but they have a number of members in Japan. And of course, they operate in other East Asian countries also. Specializing in the forces sphere, they began at the Japanese imperial court in the early 8th century. They were closely involved in the Meiji Restoration, but relocated to South Korea after World War II. Most members claim royal or noble blood. More than half of them are still in South Korea, but some operate in Japan and encourage a full restoration of the Japanese emperor. This group places great importance on warrior and artistic pursuits, seeing them as 2 sides of the same coin. They are very traditional and conservative in their outlook. Next, we have the Miaoguan. They are traditionally called the Temple of the Eternal Harmonies. They are associated with spirit. They are primarily located in China. The most feared elemental dragons specialize in the mind sphere, not through psychology as the New World Order does, but through traditional Chinese methods such as internal alchemy, breathing techniques, herbs, etc. They are very conservative in their thinking and habits. They believe peace and order must be maintained at all costs, even if the people lose free will. Next up, we have the Taiping Tianguo, which were traditionally called the Temple of Heavenly Peace. They are associated with the element of water. They are primarily located in Taiwan. Specializing in the entropy sphere, this group has a different outlook than the other elemental dragons. Their involvement with entropy over the years has led them to embrace antinomian practices. We mentioned this in the Order of Hermes tradition book episode. That's gaining insight from doing the opposite of what one thinks is right or orthodox. Most elemental dragons shun chaos to encourage order, but the Taiping Tianguo seek a kind of order within chaos. Agents of this group engage in wild behavior and are no strangers to vice. At times they engage in immoral or destructive activities to better understand the world they live in. Members of this group take risks, often believing they will either reap a great reward or learn more about the intricacies of Qi when something goes wrong. They are one of the progressive modern groups within the Elemental Dragons. They are involved in business and high technology. They enjoy complex systems of any kind. More than any other group, these agents move all about Asia. And lastly, we have the Zaibatsu. They were traditionally called the Court of the Plum Blossoms. They are associated with the element of fire. They are primarily located in Japan. Specializing in matter, these technocrats are the most modern in their thinking. They focus on high technology and big business. They believe eliminating supernatural threats, including other mage groups, is very high priority. Many members are descended from Japanese families that had the lowest social status in past centuries and changed their names to hide the fact. They are a funder and supplier of Strike Force Zero, that is a high-tech group of non-mages that go hunting monsters that threaten normal people. This group has more contacts and commerce with the Western technocracy than the other elemental dragons. So that's a brief overview of the 5 elemental dragons in Chapter 5.
So, Adam, what did you think about Chapter 5?
Well, there was a lot there, certainly. I'm glad we were able to cover a lot of it. One problem that Chapter 5 had especially, this is a problem in the whole book, but it shows up a lot in Chapter 5, is groups are mentioned before they're defined. We get faction names, often with Chinese names or Japanese names, and it's like, I don't know that name, I don't know that word, and the paragraph carries on talking about them, and 2 pages later it says, now let's tell you who that group is. In the history of the 5 elemental dragons section, it talks about how in the 1800s, early 1900s, everything that European governments was doing, that was the technocracy. And so conflating the technocracy with European governments so closely was something that I thought was not so great. I would tend to portray them as being a little more different in my games. The Siang is a elemental dragon group that operates in both Korea and Japan. There are more of them in South Korea now, but in the description it only talks about Japan. It just doesn't talk about Korea at all, where most of them are. So I was a little disappointed in that. Speaking about the 5 elemental dragons as a whole, this book portrays them as being technocrats, yet they use more mystic methods and old mystic techniques. And so that makes mysticism and techno-magic kind of run closer together. But I actually enjoyed that. I liked that, and I think it was neat to make them different in that way.
The next chapter is Chapter 6, and this is our stuff chapter. And I read this book almost in a single session, which was a poor choice on my behalf because it's a lot of book. And my notes for the items to talk about in the chapter 1,000 Things of Magic, 1,000 Places of Power in the 1,000 Things of Magic was Crazy Sword, Pretty Beads, OP Fishbowl, AI Kindle Scroll, and Nerfing Holy Water. It gives a wide selection of things that do interesting things, and 2 I will focus on is, of course, we get our ridiculous sword. We get the Arite 4 Blood Chris, and this is, I think, like the only reference we get to Malaysia, and it's in the form of a big-ass sword knife thing, and it does all sorts of stuff. One of the powers is the ability to generate Indonesian chicken soup. I am literally not making that up. Those are the words that are used on the page next to each other. And like all good knives, it periodically demands that you stab yourself if you're not good enough at using it, where it's like, you wanted chicken soup, but I don't like you. I need some blood. And you're like, okay, thanks, knife. I think the most overpowered item in here is the Fishbowl of Prosperity, which is a 3-point artifact that you get 1 automatic success on everything related to financial well-being, assuming it is filled with well-fed fish that are kept healthy. It also has a side that if it is placed in a spot with bad feng shui, its effects are reversed and doubled. I hate references to like feng shui too much. I do enjoy the Robin Laws game Feng Shui. It's a pretty good action RPG. But like, I do like the idea of how are we going to bring down the technocracy? And the answer is to break into someone's house and to move their fishbowl. Like that's a game I'll run. Adam normally has the lion's share of the plot ideas, but that one's all Terry.
I like that, actually. That's funny.
We get a bunch of other weapons that are wildly impractical. The 9 Jade Dragons, which is a trident on a trident on a trident. It's kind of annoying because in some places it'll be like, consult World of Darkness combat for rules. And in other cases it's like, here are all the stats. Go have fun. We get the Recorder's Heavenly Scroll, which is the AI Kindle I had, which will show you any nonfiction piece of work. Yay. The strange nitpick I will have is Sukahara Shigenkatsu's August Mirror is a item that is indicated as being useful to deal with ghosts and other spirits, and it talks about it being 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters and is 1 centimeter thick, making it very heavy. I didn't want to study when I was reading this, so I went through the math of if this were made out of the densest stone possible, how much would this thing weigh, which involved me coming up with a way of calculating the area of a octagon based strictly on its width, and the answer is 5 pounds. It weighs 5 pounds. It is listed as not easily transported by hand. One of my favorite items, though, listed is the Lustral Water, which is a 2-point charm that you throw on someone, and it reduces their Arete, Blood Pool, Gnosis, Discipline access, or whatever. And it automatically does 3 successes worth plus whatever you get against difficulty 9 when rolling your Arete. And I'm like, that is nuts. I was kind of let down by the 1,000 Places of Power. It talks throughout the entire book about the importance of chi and the different types and how people are cultivating it and how the elemental dragons are worried about how much of it is being produced, both by the sheer number of people and by how fecund the land is in that regard. And I'm like, oh man, we're going to get chi rules. And then it ends. We don't get any information on how the flows are necessarily directed, what volumes they're in, how a mage would use it, and that kind of goes into my criticisms of the book. Again, 3 billion people, and we just kind of get this handful of well-known sites like the Shaolin Temple or the Yellow River.
Terry mentioned briefly the 9 Jade Dragons, a 5-point artifact. It is basically a long pole arm that it says is very complicated, and I was curious. I went looking online, and I had to actually dig for a while, but I found 2 very small black and white low-resolution images that depicted what the item looks like. It looks like a pole arm that northern schools of Chinese Kung Fu train their practitioners with. But yes, it is so long and so complicated that you need a lot of room to fight with it. If you are not outside on a level field and you try to use that thing, you're probably just going to end up falling over and hurting yourself. So a very specialized weapon, but an interesting one. I liked how the wonders in this chapter brought in wonders from a lot of different places. There were even Southeast Asian nations that they didn't have a lot of time to talk about in the book, but they pulled some magic items from there. And so I thought that was nice. I liked the variety there. It talks about how Shaolin Temple used to be a wonderful and interesting place where a lot of interesting things happened, but now it's just a tourist trap, and a lot of people are very unhappy about the glories of the past being gone forever. And I thought that was kind of a bummer. I mean, with how important Shaolin Temple is in the culture of East Asian nations, especially in the pop cultural stories they tell, to say that it's like it's all gone and everybody's sad now. It's like, okay, on one hand, I guess that is kind of appropriate for Revised Edition and what the direction they're trying to take the world of Mage, but on the other hand, it's like, man, what a bummer. As for the 1,000 Places of Power, there weren't quite 1,000. Okay, yeah. there was like less than 10. And even though I say that jokingly, I was disappointed in how few places there were. I was thinking, look, if you could have dropped chapters 1 and 2, you could have had a lot more mystic places, and I certainly would have enjoyed them. Some of them were not terribly interesting, but the cellar on Bak Mai Street, which is supposed to be in a seedy back alley of Shanghai, China, I thought that was a really interesting idea. I liked how it was a place of evil and a place of power, and it's so old that it attracts in low-powered evil mages who find that their arts are much more successful there. And so they basically set up shop, and the place partially obfuscates the practitioner. So it's kind of like in a sense, it's a mystical hidey hole for them where it's harder to track them down. And if any mages come in and get rid of the evil mages, then the place will attract more evil mages in the future. And so I liked that idea. I'd like to explore that. And also the legend of the Yellow River. If a mage constructs their own old-fashioned boat and heads upstream, they will end up in a magical place. It was vague. It wasn't very detailed, but it just inspired me. I liked that idea, and I'd like a chance to play with that as a storyteller. And when looking at the book as a whole, I think it would have been a much better idea to take many of the faction names for mages and just render them in English. And not because of trouble with pronunciation, but when you give a mage faction a Chinese name, then you're really fixing it to one place on the map, to one cultural tradition, even to one language. And one of the things I like about the early days of Mage was the mage factions were all given in English. So storytellers were free to say, this is this nation or that nation. It's many nations. I can place this where I like. I can pull in the different elements that I like. The Akashic Brotherhood, I mean, they put the English word brotherhood in there. So you can say, well, you know, ideas of the Akasha, it's not just China, it's not just Japan, it's all these different places in South Asia, Southeast Asia, etc. And so it just gives a lot of flexibility. And so unless you have a craft that is tied to a very specific locale, I just think English names gives a storyteller more freedom to move. I saw a lot of mage factions and a lot of mage history that was tied very closely to real-world events and real-world groups. I guess that's kind of a continuing complaint of mine in Revised Edition. I do kind of like the early days where there was a lot of secret, spooky stuff going on that regular people just knew nothing about. But again, it's really not hard for storytellers to come up with that on their own. In all of the history sections presented in this book, it was pretty clear that the authors had in mind that the different mage factions are stand-ins. They represented groups of real-world sleepers in our own history. And that is something that I don't like as much, but I shouldn't come down on it too hard because I've talked to a lot of mage fans who really get excited by that. They really like that. So it's not my cup of tea, but I'm glad it's there for the people who really enjoy it. And as Terry said, there is a lot of mention in geomancy, Chinese geomancy in this book. They should have had some rules for it. They should have at least had a sidebar where they said, look, we can't give you detailed rules, but here's some guidelines. Here's a few simple systems you can build on. I mean, they should have done something for us because this would have been an excellent place to add that. I didn't get a lot of villain groups. I mean, there's just not really much mention of Nefandi. There's not much mention of evil mage groups. I mean, there is the Tokfan of Cambodia. They were flavorful and interesting, but I just would have liked to hear a little more. What were the Nefandi doing during ancient history days of Asia? It would have been neat. And you know what? There's not enough Korea in this book. I just gotta say it. There's not enough Korea. The Korean peninsula has a lot of fascinating culture, religion, history, legends, so much cool stuff to draw from. There was very, very little mention of it in this book in terms of history, factions, magic items, just anything. But hey, we've got a great mage community going, and I just want to open this up to the mage fans. If you know more about Korea, or if you are Korean, why don't you contribute some material? I mean, we're on Mage 20 now. We're not on a Revised Edition anymore, but I mean, Mage lore is useful for any edition. And so whether you're talking to us on our Discord or just emailing us or somewhere else on the internet, I think this is a great fan project to contribute some factions, idea, lore, etc. for the Korean Peninsula. And last off was a compliment to the book, India was ignored. And what I mean by that is India is mentioned in the history, chapter 1. It is mentioned in the Hinduism is talked about in the religion, chapter 2. But in the rest of the book, they just ignore India. And the Indian subcontinent is so large, so many people. There's so much history, so many different languages and religious things going on. I think it should either have its own book or not be mentioned. If you try to take a chapter or a section for India, then it would leave too much out. So I actually agree with the author's decision on, we just can't do much with India here. Before we get into some adventure ideas, I was talking with Terry about how is this book aged? It's 20 years old, and how does it look 20 years later? And I just wanted to start off the discussion by saying that I think the authors thought it was exciting to look at what the pundits were saying in 2000 and what the headlines were reading in 2000 and work it into the book and make it topical. But when game writers do that, they always take the risk of what if things are really different 5 years later. And that's why we have so many game books for so many different games that look at ancient history, legends, religious influences stuff and work that into the game, because that is just not going to change. But if you take today's headlines, 2 years from now, it might be a whole different ballgame. Specifically, what I noticed in this book is when talking about the elemental dragons, it had two elemental dragon groups that were preeminent in the nation of China. And they are both depicted as being very old-fashioned, conservative, traditional. They're not really crazy about what's going on in modern times, to be general. And so because of that, they say, China has no space race. They're not interested in putting people into space. They have no desire for that. And they've actually kept out the void engineers to make sure it stays that way. Well, now it's 2020. The government of China and the people of China are interested in space. They want to get out there and explore, and I can certainly understand that. And so a storyteller is going to have to work with that. It's like, well, did the void engineers get influence in China 20 years later? Or did those two elemental dragon groups decide, oh, let's change? Or did the sleepers take hold of things and say, we're going to do this? And the two elemental dragons are thinking, oh gosh, how do we put the genie back in the bottle? Which, as we all know, is very hard to do. The other point is, again, with China, it's said that China is not very interested, not very involved with high-tech industry and enterprises and research because of those two elemental dragons that are stuck in the past. And nowadays, of course, China is very, very involved in showing amazing gains in leadership in high-tech business and high-tech research and development. And so, again, a storyteller is going to have to look at, well, okay, what changed? For many years now, when we look at Japan, there have been two big issues that were not mentioned in this book, but soon after were making major headlines, and many years later are still making headlines. And that is, these two items are, one, the aging population. Japanese people are living very long lives, and so Japan as a nation has a large number of people who are retired. They're not working. They're not putting tax money into the system, but they need elderly care, and so they are pulling tax money out of the system. And the other issue is the very, very low birth rate, which it's even negative numbers. The population of Japan is not having children at a rate fast enough to replace its own numbers down the road. And so the result of that is there are less young people entering the workforce and contributing tax money to the nation. And so these two issues together make a major economic problem. And that's not just today's headlines. Those have been headlines for many years, and they're just not going away. And so, of course, a storyteller would ask, well, do I want to play with this in my chronicle? And if so, what could I do with this? There are a couple of places in this book where it says internet access in Asia is just not very good, and the elemental dragons are taking advantage of that to manipulate the people and keep things from them. And just a few years after this book was published, there was the explosion of smartphones all through Asia. Young people everywhere were getting smartphones. They had internet on the go, and just a few years later, internet access was much faster, much more accessible throughout Asia. Still not perfect, it's still not great for everyone, but the point is, there is a lot more internet access here. And so there are a couple of places in this book where it's saying, oh, the elemental dragons are keeping the people down because they can't get their internet. Well, it's different now.
A lot of things change in 20 years. So if you look at the population of Asia and you sort by size, China has the most population, but the next 4 or 5, depending on how you define it, are just completely ignored. We don't get anything on India, Indonesia, Pakistan, or Bangladesh. I feel like people don't recognize that Bangladesh has 160 million people in it. It is not a particularly large country and could contain it has a population of more than half of the US's in something like the land area of Kansas. I can't remember what the exact statistic is, but I think it was for the best that a lot of that was left off the table. It is sad, though, that we never got that India book, that we never got a South Asia or an Indian subcontinent book, and I would have really liked to have seen it.
Would have been very cool.
Yeah. In the same way that all of China was reduced to the Akashiana for the longest time, all of India was reduced to the Chakravanti or the Euthanatoi for a while. And I have hopes that eventually changes. Again, Adam brought up the idea of community content. And there are some authors on the Storyteller Vault that are bringing their stories and their expertise to it. There is a series of books called Manila by Nights that just outlines what's happening in the Philippines. Black Fire over Tondo is another East Asia supplement that has been released. It takes place, I think, in Palampang. I don't quite remember. There are some clan books that have been generated. They have had some success. A number of them are silver sellers, which indicates that they've moved at least 100 copies, so that's nice. And if you would like to add to that, please do. And we look forward to promoting it once it's out in the world. in terms of overall thoughts in order, the spheres depicted here were kind of a mess. I think Revised did, up until this point, did a pretty good job of trying to be consistent and trying to explain why spheres did what, but I think that really fell off. I think that may have been an artifact of the several writers each trying to come up with different rotes. I would probably have to redo it. It is interesting in saying, as I made the joke earlier, talking about using a thunderbolt to get from point A to point B and using forces plus prime plus matter to do so. If you want to reinterpret the spheres to be different or kind of be resharded, again, that's fine. It's just a fair amount of work. Like Adam said, no information on chi harvesting. We get systems in other of the East Asian inflected lines, which indicate that one of the important things is a character needs to maintain balance, that maybe you have several attributes that you need to keep track of, and if they fall out of balance with one another, something happens. And then very quickly, though, that if the Shinta are fundamentally the same as Western mages, just with different paradigm, why would they have a different fundamental system for quintessence? Does that mean when a Western mage goes over there, they don't have access to chi and vice versa? Or is it influenced by the dominant cultural paradigm? Like, how would you need to modify the prime sphere? Again, it is a fundamentally different view of things, and from a game systems perspective, I kind of need an answer to that if I actually want to use it. This is not one of those cases where I'm just being like, well, I never answered a fundamental question about the nature of the avatar. Well, in a game, I don't need that answer. But when it comes down to how does quintessence work, that is a core system that as a storyteller, I really need an answer to that. On a more removed sense, the book was sloppy in a bunch of cases. I think the editing kind of had encountered difficulties, as Adam mentioned. There was a section of it that was just kind of in the wrong place. And the one that I found more functionally problematic was this book made references to other books, and the thing that it referenced being in those other books weren't there. For instance, it mentions the Ministry of Works, which is suggested as being this organization that the Wulong use to keep track of who is practicing magic where, and if you don't register with them, your magic is harder. The paradigm will not allow you to perform it, which is kind of a cool idea, but it says go to Blood and Silk, chapter 3, and I'm like, a World of Darkness book, of course I have this. So I went to the bookshelf, I pulled it out, and I go through all of chapter 3. It's not there. There's no reference to the Ministry of Works as to what it does. And then it says in a different place, consult Sorcerer's Crusade Companion. And I looked through there and nothing. So, and that happened in more than one occasion where it said, hey, look to this book for this thing. And it quite simply wasn't there. I guess my final criticism of the book overall is there wasn't a lot of art. Throughout most of late second edition, we got at least a half-page illustration every other 2-page spread. So out of every 4 pages, we would get at least one full half-page image. This had about half of that, which resulted in sections where there would be 6 to 8 pages in a row where it was just 2 columns of text. And as a reader, I didn't appreciate the visual break that art provided until I kind of noticed that. For instance, in the Elemental Dragon section, there are 4 illustrations across 25 pages. That's not a lot. We still get the opening chapter ones. Artistically, it was kind of interesting that the 2 artists in here were Leif Jones and Melissa Yoran, which is kind of like the most Western artist and the most East Asian inflected artist that we have. And I guess my final thought is the book gives you so much to work with. It really feels like a fire hose. If you're willing to do a bit of a lift as a storyteller, overall, I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. You're going to have to spend more time separating the wheat from the chaff than maybe I would have liked. And as Adam said, there's a lot of words in chapters 1 and 2 that maybe didn't need to be there. I feel like the book was kind of hastily assembled in some ways where it's like, oh crap, the history section is really long, but we can only go to 140 pages. Can we cut some information from here? And maybe we lost chi rules in the process or something like that. There's a lot in here if you're willing to do some sifting. I think there's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of really fun stuff. I wouldn't use anything here just drag and drop into a game. I would want to do a little bit of homework to make sure it reflects actual practices and the current state of the world. But I thought it was a lot of fun. It was just maybe a little too long, and it was a little bit on the grueling side. So
yeah. I think it was an idea book that's packed full, but I'm not going to use it as a whole. And a lot of the things I pick out of here, I'm going to polish a bit before I drop it into my own chronicle. And there's some things that I'm even going to alter. But so many ideas, so much material, definitely worth reading through. Some of the rule systems in here or rotes make you feel odd. you're not alone, but that doesn't mean you throw it out. It's a little bit of adjustment, and we storytellers are not that clueless when it comes to magical effects with the rules. So we can make this work without too much extra work, and there's so many ideas here. Okay, well, I wanted to finish this off with some adventure ideas for the elemental dragons. I'm going to be a little more focused this time. Number one, agents in the know inside the elemental dragons have long been aware that the Ziguang have been keeping their project in North Korea very quiet. The players are sent to Shenyang, a large city in Liaoning province, China, as specialists to consult on a local problem. While there, they detect a spy whom they follow to her lair. They learn the spy is part of a secret movement within the Saiyan Saying, one of the elemental dragon groups, seeking to shake off outside influence on North Korea. The shocker is the real power is not the Ziguang, but the Taiping Tianguo, who are passing qi and false info to the Ziguang to give them the illusion of control. The Taiping Tianguo have embarked on a massive experiment to see how qi emanations alter under severe and long-term pressure. The results are pleasing the heartless overseers, and the next phase, beginning soon, will be even harsher. Will the players use their new intelligence to infiltrate North Korea and oppose this plan directly? They might also travel Asia, informing elemental dragon leaders of the secret. If they do, they'll need to keep one step ahead of Dr. Tsang's hitmen. Number two, nodes throughout Cambodia and Vietnam are increasing their output dramatically. New nodes are appearing too. The resonance on qi from these nodes varies unpredictably. Both the elemental dragons and the Western technocracy struggle to understand the phenomenon. The players are sent to the area with the latest in qi detection equipment. Warned against local mystic factions, the players instead find the mystics are gone. The only groups active in the area are Western technocrats and the Hixian, ancient beings who are not mages but wield bizarre powers. As the players try to determine if the Hixian are manipulating the nodes, they must dodge technocrat agents while their own techniques go haywire. The strong, rapidly shifting resonances from nearby nodes will make their reliable effects completely unreliable. A great fish out of water scenario as players quickly try to learn local customs while they use skills and rotes they don't usually rely on. Number three, the Miaoguan of China have struggled for years with the pressures of rapid change due to technology. They resisted the soulless Zaibatsu's attempts to gain power in their home, but sleeper activity has gone beyond their influence. The prosperity and ability to keep watch on sleepers that technology offers is causing a split in the Miaoguan's leadership. Some are openly saying they should learn from Iteration X. Both groups have roots in China and believe in firm central authority. In the midst of this, the players are assigned to a project in Guangzhou, southern China. They learn the project is under Iteration X control, and the elemental dragon in charge is a traitor. When the players are asked to throw in with the conspiracy, they must decide if their loyalties lie with the old world or the new. Whatever they decide, they must learn the art of subtlety to resolve the situation. If they raise an alarm, the fighting will claim the lives of agents and sleepers alike. Well, those are three ideas for the elemental dragons. Hopefully those will inspire some ideas of your own at your own gaming table.
And my quote of the episode is, I think the good summary of using a lot of specific terms was, a dragon wizard's ultimate goal is to refine crude qi into li through the practice of qing.
Oh, well, that just tells me that I don't know enough Chinese.
Exactly. If you're okay wading through that, awesome. It rewards effort. So what are we reading next, Adam?
Let's see. Next up is Sorcerer Revised Edition, which I've heard great things about, and we'll be able to compare to World of Darkness Sorcerer, which was put out during 2nd edition days.
Awesome. You want to take us out?
If you have something to say, please contact us at magethepodcast@gmail.com with your questions, comments, or feedback. You can subscribe to Mage the Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and other aggregators. If you like the show, others might like it too. And if you leave a review of Mage the Podcast, it makes us more visible in their searches. You can follow us on Twitter at Mage the Podcast. We're also on the web at magethepodcast.com. You can listen to past episodes there, and we will provide complete show notes to give you something extra. This episode is thanks to executive producers Ira Grace, Richard Bat Brewster, John Magnuson, Jenna F., Andrew Edelstein, Chris Zack, Christopher Phillips, Bryce Perry, Brandon Morrill, Andrew Katz, Michael Parker, Anders, and Justin. If you would like to become an executive producer for Mage the Podcast, it would help us keep producing episodes. You would also become a part of our own council to discuss upcoming projects. The link in the show notes will get you started. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, truth until paradox, baby.
Go change Asia. Bye.